them, being able to tolerate the emotions of other people and yourself. If we're trying to build a culture of empathy, that's going to be hard if the understanding of emotions is primarily professionalized.
So I've heard one definition of an empath being like someone that's very sensitive. Like we all, as you've talked about before, we all have empathy in the sense we have mirror neurons and are always feeling each other to kind of one degree or another. But that a person that's an empath is like has a very heightened sense of that awareness of other people. Is that quality of sensitivity, is that something you think about in terms of an empath?
For me, it's true, and for the people that I've met, it's true that we could also be called highly sensitive people. So I'm sensitive to sound, to colors, to vision, to movement, to pitch in songs, to behavior, to voice, sort of everything comes in at me. And it made my early childhood very difficult, especially in the classroom situation, because the point of being in a classroom is to sit still and focus. And the point of being me was to move and to notice everything, including the birds outside and the trouble that this one was having with his pencil, and then this one back here seems to be, shuffling in her seat, what's going on, and the teacher is sad today, but she's trying to cover it, and the principal is not a very nice man, that sort of thing. That was my experience of school.
So you're very sensitive to the entire environment.
And for me, with this overabundance of empathy, a great deal of the work that I needed to do as a person was to learn to have boundaries and to not empathize with people, which is funny because most people would be coming from the other direction. And what I find is, in the work that I've done, is I generally find people who are as sensitive as I am and just need to have some skills about how to understand what is mine, what belongs to me, and what doesn't. Because if you don't have the ability to set boundaries and to hold your own sense of self, you can easily go flying off onto somebody else's journey. And so the work that I've done is learning to set boundaries, learning to stay grounded, learning to calm myself down so that I don't just go, wafting off into someone else's emotional behaviors, so that I can understand my own emotions. So that I can more easily articulate what someone else is feeling.
So if you're empathic, very sensitive to empathy, you can perhaps lose yourself and not know where your boundaries are, and who you are and who the other person is.
And that was something I had a great deal of trouble with when I was a younger woman. Is in the book I say I was abused as a child. By a neighbor, so it wasn't in the family. So I had a place where I had some safety. But what I learned at a very young age was to be available when people were mentally ill or were unable to manage their behaviors and their emotions. I learned that there was something I could do there. And so growing up, when someone would be, quite off the hook with their behavior or quite violent or difficult or whatever, I would go stand by them, to keep them company and to make sure that they weren't going to be too dangerous, that sort of thing. So I put myself in a lot of really unnecessary danger in order to be empathic, if you understand, in order to have empathy and to try to welcome people who were dangerous into the sphere of my life. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes it failed miserably. but I now, after learning to create boundaries, I'm now able to sort of sociologically visit them, to look at them, understand their lives, understand what they're going through, but not sort of throw myself away in this, I guess, this passion to understand, and this passion to make life safer and more logical and more more beautiful for everyone. You realize sometimes people are doing that because they need to for right now. And that eventually they will figure it out or they won't. That was the hardest thing for me, was to say, it'll either work or it won't. Because my impetus was to go and make sure that it worked, to fix it, to make sure that people weren't suffering. And that's a lot of work.
So you're kind of taking it on, and
Yeah.
it becomes kind of your problem. Instead
Yeah.
of, so you're,
Yeah, what can I do? How can I fix this? What might I, so that was a lot of my early training, was how can I fix this problem that this person is not willing to fix on their own? And so learning to say to people, okay, that's your difficulty, and you can ask me for help, but I'm not just going to jump, as soon as I see you struggling. And I think that's difficult for most people.
that was like one of the first boundaries, then,
Yeah.
was creating that boundary.
About boundaries. Anger is about setting boundaries. It is about protecting your sense of self, your voice, your position, your standpoint. And for people who have had their boundaries taken apart, there is always anger trouble. I call them anger impaired or boundary impaired. So for someone who has had boundaries destroyed or taken away from them, you will often see passive aggression, you will see raging behaviors, or you will see a refusal to feel anger. And that person might instead create boundaries with sadness or fear, that's not the purpose of those emotions. Sadness exists to help you release things that don't work, and fear exists to help you identify danger or change or novelty in your environment. So to have fear as your boundary means that what's supposed to be out here protecting you is instead this hypervigilant emotion whose job is to go, what's that? What's that? Oh, look at that. Oh, what about that? Right? So if you have fear as your boundary, you're going to be jacked up all the time. Now, if you put sadness as your boundary, and sadness's purpose is to help you let go of things that aren't working, not to take things that belong to you, but to let go of things that aren't working. So if you've got sadness as your presenting emotion, you would tend to just let go of everything, continually let go of things that are important to you, and you would have a sense of loss all the time. So those two emotions don't belong in the boundary. Now, if you have anger in the boundary, which anger says this far, no further, that your rights end here, that there's a place where we exist together, but this is my space. Now, when you have healthy anger, basically people aren't going to know it, because the way that we have been taught about anger is that this is anger. Damn you! That anger is an expressive, negative emotion. And yet that's only anger in one of its guises. What I see when I teach people about boundaries is you hold yourself steady. That's anger. It's not threatening. It's not brutal. It's not sarcastic, or it's not going to hurt you. So there is a place where you utilize this area around yourself to say, this is where my anger stays, and that I work with it so that you don't have to. Right? So if I'm sending anger at you, then I'm going to be breaking down your sense of self, and I'm going to endanger you as a human being. And so you may need to attack me. So as soon as I attack you, I have just opened the floodgates of of the possible violence between us. So it's important to understand anger, to hold it as a really potent weapon